3 weeks ago I've made a video about Race Driver Grid. Come on, we have to talk about Grid 2. This video was inevitable. So yeah, let's analyze Grid 2. Hi everyone, as always Patrick here. If you're already subscribed, make sure you turn on notifications, otherwise YouTube won't tell you if I posted anything. If you are new to the channel, make sure you watch until the very end and consider subscribing if you like it. Okay, Grid 2. Grid 2 was developed and published by Codemasters in 2013. Everybody knows this, so let's start the analysis video by talking about the graphics. Obviously, a game from 2013 is still going to look very good even today, and there's a reason for that. What's the reason? PS4 and Xbox One came out the same year, yet Codemasters didn't release the game for PS4 and the Xbox One. Weird. Regardless, Codemasters wanted to show that they can still make an amazing looking game without releasing the game for the PS4 and the Xbox One, and it shows. Everything about the graphics of Grid 2 is polished and well designed. Everything has this feeling like you're actually there. Nice level of detail, nice effects, good texture work, etc, etc. The game also has some nice small details like the 3D effect on the fonts and other things. But the best thing about the graphics of Grid 2 is the optimization. You can have the worst PC of all time and you will still be able to run this game at ultra graphics and with a high frame rate. That's amazing. So yeah, the graphics are very good, the optimization is fantastic. What about the options? Well, the game supports widescreen resolutions like 1080p without any troubles, or well, it actually does have minor issues, but those can be easily fixed. The game perfectly supports multi-monitors, ultra widescreen, and the game even runs in 4K, which is amazing. There is anisotropic filtering, there is anti-aliasing up to 8 times MSAA and CMAA, there is VSync, and like I've said before, the game runs at high frame rates even if you have a horrible PC. So that's amazing. That's very good. But as perfect as things might seem, there is one big problem. There's no FOV slider. Thankfully, this is very easy to fix. You have to download and run the dirt-free FOV change. Yes, it works in Grid 2 as well. You have to specify the base installation folder, then you have to set the vertical FOV and enable the desired cameras. Also, make sure that chase close reverse and chase far reverse, head cam and head cam reverse are always disabled. Also, do not, and I repeat, do not adjust any of the head offset and head tilt change settings. Then you click on start to apply the changes. And that's it, you've changed the FOV. Oh right, I almost forgot. Get this, Codemasters actually fixed the one thing I absolutely hated in Grid 1. They removed the yellow filter by default. I love this change. It gives the game much more color and it also makes the graphics a lot better. Also the stability. Yes, I know, I've said that the game runs perfectly on terrible PCs, and it is true, but I'm talking from my experience here, so let me just say this. The game didn't crash, it didn't lag, but I swear there's something wrong with my PC, because it started like crazy when I was recording. But only when I was recording. When I was playing this game, when I wasn't recording, it ran perfectly fine. Because like I've said, this game runs perfectly on terrible, atrocious PCs. So yeah, the game is very good. It's a very good PC release. That's what I wanted to say. It's a very good PC release. It has minor problems, but it can very easily be fixed. So no worries. Okay, time to talk about the story. And here I want to be clear. When I've made my Race Driver Grid video, I've made a small mistake. I've said that the game had a story, but I wasn't sure. I mean, the wasn't sure part was true, but yeah, I get. But when you really think about it, the game didn't really have a story. I mean, you had your first race, then you were in your garage trying to rebuild your Mustang. You did offers for other companies, and then you competed in races and 24-hour Le Mans, or whatever you pronounce that. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce those things. In Grid 2, I guess you could say the game has a story, but I don't really see this as a story. Maybe you do see this as a story, I personally don't. But you know what? Let's give the benefit of the doubt and let's just say the game has a story. You compete in a race, you gain 3,500 fans, and you have to show the world that you are the best driver. And while you're doing this, there are a few seasons. In the first season, you basically race for other people, and then you are working for Patrick Callahan because he wants to create his own racing series, and because you showed him that you are capable of doing racing, you join and then you race. And then the rest of the story is not important. Honestly, the story can be ignored, and for the most part that's what I did. And I think that pretty much sums up the story. It kinda exists, it kinda goes somewhere, but who cares honestly if you can just ignore it? Because when you think about it, who pays attention to story in racing games? I mean, sometimes I do, if the story is good, you know? Sometimes the story is bad, but there are many racing games with bad stories, but I still pay attention to them. With Grid 2, the story is easy to follow, it exists, but for the most part you can ignore it. And if you're going to play the game, I guess, well, just ignore the story. Honestly, that's all there is to the story, so let's talk about the gameplay. And there's a lot to talk about, except not really, because I'm not going to sit here for 30 minutes trying to explain how the game works. So I will give you the abridged version. Let's start with the basics and then I'll move on to more advanced stuff. The true feel handling. Codemasters pushed the boundaries with Race Driver Grid, continuing to do so with the newest incarnation. The biggest component of this is their introduction of the True Feel Handling system, a core feature that promises to combine true-to-life physics with each individual type of car. To accomplish the marriage of physics and gameplay, Codemasters used professional drivers on real-life courses. Detailed notes and measures were taken about each type of vehicle, including speed, maneuverability, difficult word, cornering, turning, etc. This was an effort to duplicate as precisely as possible the character of each vehicle so that players would actually feel they were driving. For instance, a Nissan GT-R spec rather than some dumbed down computer model. Once those results were complied, they went and examined if any of the vehicles had any sort of game blocking attribute, such as that would make the car much less likely to be raceworthy. These were tweaked accordingly, with all effort made to preserve the character of the car. So let's quickly talk about the career modes, but I actually don't have a lot to say. In Grid 2, players are responsible for transforming a new racing league, the World Series of Racing, from its grassroots into a global phenomenon, being its star driver. You know, something I talked about in the story segment already. Let's talk about the damage. Players experience realistic handling effects as a result of vehicle damage. In particularly bad crashes, damage may be terminal. And here's something I have to say. Once you complete the first race, you can play around in the menus, and then you can choose if you want the damage to be basic or full. Basic damage is, well, pretty basic. Nothing really gets destroyed. When you do full damage, the car takes serious damage, it is affected by the damage, and it can be terminal, like I've said. If it's terminal, you have to restart the race. Flashbacks, can't forget about those. A rewind feature can be used to revert back to a chosen moment if things go wrong during a race. The availability of flashback is determined by the chosen difficulty or is customizable in custom events. However, there's a catch. You see, in Race Driver Grid, the amount of... There are two differences between the flashback mechanic in Grid 1 and Grid 2. The first difference is that in Grid 1, the higher difficulty you chose, you had less flashbacks. So when you chose basic difficulty, you had all 5 flashbacks. If you chose extreme difficulty, you had only 1. And if you also enabled Pro mode, you didn't have flashbacks at all, no matter what difficulty you chose. But in Grid 2, well, let's just say that no matter which difficulty you choose, you will always get 5 flashbacks. That makes the game easier then, right? Not really, because there's the second difference, which is pretty big. In Race Driver Grid, when you used a flashback, you could pinpoint the exact moment where you wanted to use the flashback. It usually gives you like 12, you could choose one frame from 12 seconds. You choose a very specific frame and then you just use the flashback. Simple as that. In Grid 2 it's done worse. Way worse. Once you press the flashback button, it automatically rewinds for you and you cannot control the rewind. You have to use your brain and pinpoint the exact moment where you want to use the flashback, because if you go past that point, you can't just go back to the point you missed. You have to use the flashback in this one point where the game stopped. So if you went all the way, the flashback, the rewind bar went all the way to the left, and you wanted to use it earlier, tough luck. You can't use it. Actually, you know what? You can see this right now. Notice how you can't control anything. You have to press the flashback key in the exact moment. You can't control it. That is not good. Let's quickly talk about the vehicles and courses. Vehicles. Throughout the World Series of Racing seasons, the player's investor will reward new cars at key milestones in the career with choices between two cars. The car that was not chosen, as well as other new cars, can be earned upon beating vehicle challenges. During online, new cars can be unlocked upon reaching higher levels. Additional vehicles would be made available in downloadable contact packs, which I'm not gonna cover because I don't have them and I'm not able to get them. Customization. Players can customize the appearance of their vehicles by choosing from a variety of paint patterns, colors, race number, and finishes. They can also personalize the style of wheels and select up to 6 sponsor decals. Courses. A wide range of worldwide based tracks in featured, such as the streets of Chicago, the mountain roads of Okutama, or the circuit of Brands Hatch. Both day and night races are available to experience. Additional tracks would be offered as downloadable content. Live routes. New to Grid 2 are live routes through the city locations, in which the route changes during the race by opening or closing barriers at selected junctions, so that two laps are not the same. Okay, time to talk about the more advanced stuff. And before we begin though, I have to say this. We have to compare two games, Grid 2 and Race Driver Grid, because it makes sense. Here's the most important thing you need to know. Race Driver Grid came out back in 2008. Grid 2 came out in 2013. That's a 5-year gap between those games. And because it's a 5-year gap, a lot of things have changed since 2008, especially in 2013. There were a lot of trends that just come and gone. Like I've said, a lot of things have changed. And we need to take this to consideration because what I'm about to talk about is not very positive in my opinion. Let's go back to the vehicles really quickly. I have to say the vehicles in Race Driver Grid were amazing. Every single car felt different. Every car had different stats. Some of them were better, some of them were worse. Some of them turned just fine. Some of them had good speed, good top speed. Some of them had, bad top speed, and etc. etc. I can go on all day. Thing is, in Grid 2, yes, just like Grid 1, cars are different from each other. Like I've said before, each one has different top speed, each one handles differently. Some of them turn very well, some of them don't want to turn. So there are a lot of cars in the game and each of them feel alright. They feel different. So, the game encourages you to try new cars. Or different cars, I should say. But here's the thing. The handling was changed in Grid 2. It was changed in a bad way. The handling in Grid 2 is much worse compared to Grid 1. In Grid 1, the handling was pretty realistic. The Race Driver Grid was a simcade game, or just a simcade game, and it did the handling just right. Like I've said before, every car felt different. The handling also felt different for every car. You had to use your brain when you were driving those, and there's a lot more things I can say, but I don't really know how to explain this to you. So what about Grid 2? In Grid 2, Codemasters decided to change the handling, and it is changed in a way that it heavily relies on drifting. In Grid 2, you will drift a lot. There's a lot of drifting. No matter what kind of track it is, you will always drift. It can be a small drift, it can be a big drift, it can be any kind of drift, really. So remember when I said that every car behaves differently in Grid 2? That is true, but there is one exception to that rule: drifting. That's a big problem for me, because no matter what car you choose, your car will always drift the same way. You may argue that the drifting is easy to remember then. I mean, it is, but the thing is, this doesn't really fit the theme of Grid overall. Yes, the tracks in Grid 2 were designed with drifting in mind. I mean, you will drift a lot, like I've said. There's a reason why I don't really drift in the footage. Because for me, drifting doesn't really fit in Grid at all. Yeah, I don't actually know how to explain this. The drift feels the same for every car, and it doesn't feel the theme of Grid. I don't actually like this feature, and this change, sorry, not this feature, this change. Grid 1 did it miles better. In Grid 1, every car felt different, and it didn't rely on drifting. It relied on your skills. You had to know when to brake, when to turn, when to do anything really, and also what car you choose. This is kinda the same in Grid 2, but there's too much drifting. I know I'm repeating myself at this point, but let me say this one last time. It just doesn't fit in Grid. Basically, it's not necessarily a bad change, but it just doesn't fit the theme of Grid. How many times have I said it? Have I said this now? Honestly, can someone make a counter for that? But there is one thing that is fitting in Grid 2: the tracks and the level design. Because Codemasters changed the handling to something that I like to call drift to win formula, the tracks had to be changed as well. Well, as I've said earlier. And unlike the change in the handling that I don't like, the track design and the level design is actually really good. Every track feels different and in a good way, and not in a bad way compared to the handling. Every track has many different aspects to cover. I don't really know how to say it well, so I'll just say this. Each track has this one moment where you can top out your speed. There are some sharp turns, some light turns, and they were designed with this drifting in mind, and it works so well. I will give this game credit where credit is due. When you drift around the corners, and when you drift around the corners perfectly, it is so satisfying. So basically, the handling is still good, but it relies too much on drifting, and personally I would rather take the handling from Race Driver Grid, since in Race Driver Grid the cars have more grip and slide out more naturally. Did I mention that Grid 2 is a simcade game? It doesn't really feel like a simcade game to me. It feels like an arcade game to me. It's not a bad thing, but there's another thing you need to know. In Race Driver Grid, you could slightly customize your vehicle when it comes to handling. You know, you had the assists like traction control, the understeer, and other things you could just customize. This really changed the way you play the game. It sometimes made it easier, sometimes made it harder, and you could change it at any time you want. In Grid 2, you can't change those options. You can't change the car options, and you can't change the assists at all. What you see is what you get. You have to deal with it. So if there's something you don't like, well, tough luck. Deal with it. Now you're probably thinking, but there were also drift events in Race Driver Grid, and yes, you are right. But the game didn't force you to drift. It was just an event, just an option, you know? You didn't have to drift to win. I mean, except for the drift events, but that was just a minor gimmick. In Grid 2, it's a big gimmick, and I don't like that. It doesn't fit the game, like I've said many times before, and hopefully this is the last time I'm going to mention it, because now it's time to talk about the tracks. I'm not gonna talk much about the tracks because I've already mentioned the most important things, so I'll keep this brief. Like I've said before, the tracks are well designed because Codemasters decided to do this drift to win formula, and the tracks were designed with this drift to win formula in mind. And like I've said before, the tracks are very well designed. There are moments where you can reach your top speed. There are moments where there are small turns, then you have the sharp turns. You have pretty much everything you can ask for. The atmosphere on those tracks is also great. The same goes for the sense of speed. But I have a problem with that. Everything about this just seems fake. Meanwhile, in Race Driver Grids, everything felt real. Not only the handling, but the tracks as well. And while I do think that the tracks in Grid 2 are very well designed, I would much rather take the level design from Race Driver Grid because not only because of the variety, but also because of the track variety, but also because of the aesthetic, I guess you could call it. Oh, and the tracks in Race Driver Grid are also better in design. Can't forget about that. The thing is, in Race Driver Grid, I felt like I was an actual racing driver, you know? In Grid 2, I don't have the same feeling. Okay, it's time to talk about the bad stuff. Surprisingly, there's not a lot of bad things I can say about this game, but man, I don't know. The first thing is that everything feels fake, you know? The emotion feels fake, the engagement in the game feels fake. Like, the tracks also feel fake, even though they are very well designed. The handling seems fake, and when I was playing Race Driver Grid, everything felt real to me. Another bad quality. Well, do you remember when I've made the Race Driver Grid video? In that video, I've said that Codemasters cannot recreate the handling and the feeling of Race Driver Grid. And this game is the reason why I feel this way. And the sequels also make me feel the same way, but that's another story for another video, or should I say a bunch of videos. You know, I am so angry that Codemasters just couldn't take the handling and basically everything couldn't take everything from Race Driver Grid and then improve on those things in Grid 2. Man, this not only this makes me angry, this makes me sad, and it also makes me disappointed. And also the last but quality. Some of the challenges are pretty annoying, like the car passing challenge. I don't really know how to explain it to you, so yeah. In conclusion, I know I was very negative during this last part of the video, but I just want to say this. Don't f- don't get the wrong idea. Just because I've talked about the bad stuff and I didn't really like the gameplay aspect of the game, arguably the most important aspect of the game, I don't think that Grid 2 is a bad game. In fact, I think it's a good game. I did enjoy my time with the game. So what's the problem? It's not the same. I didn't have the same feeling of wow, that's amazing when I played this game. When I played Race Driver Grid, I had this feeling, but Grid 2 to me is like something is missing. I just really miss how great Race Driver Grid was, and Grid 2 just made everything feel so fake. But like I've said, this doesn't mean that Grid 2 is a bad game. It's a good game. And what can I say? Get the game. Or that's what I would have said if the game was available on Steam. Yeah, just like with every Codemasters game, because the licenses have expired, you can't buy the game anymore. So yeah, that's great. Just if you didn't buy the game back then, you can't get the game now. That's not not good. Yeah, that's not good. But I'm just going to say this. The Grid 2 is a good game, and I did enjoy my time with Grid 2. It's just not as good as Race Driver Grid. But that pretty much sums up everything I wanted to say in this analysis video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.